So when we look at this treaty, part of this treaty is looking at the the boundaries that are established, and some of these boundaries are out of the control of the Treaty of Versailles leadership, and that's one of the things we have to be careful with. So there's going to be a general discussion that the Treaty of Versailles did this to this region. In fact, there was World War One doesn't really end in this region like it does in the West. It ends in 1918 in France, but things are going on really all over the place in Central and Eastern Europe. Following the war, that the powers of France, for example, and much of this region, is unable to contain or control. So, for example, in between Russia and this newly established Poland, a war breaks out almost immediately over territorial boundaries. Russia is in the middle of a civil war from 1918 to 1921, and so there's fighting and conflicts all throughout this region, and in some regions of the Baltics. Um, there's a change of hands of who's in control at different times, and Lenin generally gives up the Baltics because he's unable to control this region. He doesn't have time for it. Um, there's fighting in the south. There is ethnic cleansing occurring in the former Ottoman Empire and this newly established Turkey against Armenians. There's conflicts all over the place, really. And what the treaty is going to do is when these conflicts settle, what it in fact does is sanction these territorial adjustments. So what happens on the ground is just basically given a stamp of approval in many ways. So as empires disintegrate and some new nations are formed, some of these are just kind of given a rubber stamp after all the chaos quiets down in the region. And there is a lot of chaos. In Hungary, for example, in 1919, a communist government emerges under a man named Bela Kun, and this is going to cause Romania to invade at one point, and the French are going to be in the south, and so there's a lot of things happening, and so sometimes the treaty is blamed solely for the boundary changes, but in many ways it's out of their control. And when it all ends, they say, yes, this will keep these boundary changes. There will be some plebiscites where there's in some of the border regions, for example, between Austria and Hungary, there's some small voting of populations on certain cities asking if they want to, which side they want to be on. For example, in this area known as Sopron in Hungary, votes to be on the Hungarian side of the border. And so they're able to have small changes made by the treaty, but in many ways, like I said, they just sanction it. These will be the new border states, and what they're looking for in the establishment of some of these new countries or larger countries is some large countries who are allied, especially with France, and some smaller nations that become of a lesser threat to the West in many ways. So the French wanted something they call cordon sanitaire, this region in between themselves and Russia and Germany, to try and break up the powers in this region, and new states do emerge at the end of World War One. And if you look at that one map that I have, the interactive map, it kind of details this, but I'll just give you a list real quick of some of the new nations. From the north, you have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which are established. Germany has new borders, but still keeps its East Prussian territories in the Baltic. It's separated basically by Poland. Poland is reconstituted for the first time since the 18th century, but there's this little narrow strip called the Danzig Corridor, which has basically gives Poland an outlet to the sea, which becomes an area of contention that Hitler is going to use to justify its attacks on Poland. Uh, Going south, we have the new nation of Czechoslovakia for the first time. What we think of Ukraine is not a new nation. Once the treaty is signed, once everything settles in this region, it becomes part of the Soviet Union. Romania is vastly enlarged by the treaty. Hungary is reduced, loses 2/3 of its territory, and it's one of the harsher parts of the treaty is against the Hungarians who still lament this Treaty of Trianon today. Austria becomes a rump nation of once was this great empire for them, and the Treaty of Saint-Germain against the Austrians denies them any link with northern Germans, and this is again something that Hitler will try to readjust in the 1930s by joining Austria to the Third Reich. Other new nations to the south of Hungary and Austria is a union of South Slavs. It's originally going to be called the Kingdom of Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. That name will change in the early 1920s to Yugoslavia, which means Yugo means south, which means South Slavs, a union of South Slavs. And there's going to be some enlarged nations. Greece will enlarge its territory. Bulgaria will lose some of its territory. And Turkey emerges as a new nation as well. And so that's some of the major territorial changes following World War I in that region. To the west, part of this treaty against Germany is that there's going to be an occupation of the Rhineland, of France will have occupation of this, and of the Saar Basin. Both of these regions are coal-producing regions, and what France wants more than anything during this treaty is not revenge, and that's the common orthodox approach to this treaty, that France is out for revenge. The truth is, and all the documents show, France wants economic security and is in dire need of coal at the end of the war. And when they want reparations, their definitions of reparations are repair. And what they want is the Germans to help repair the regions physically damaged by the war along those trenches. And however, the French are convinced this is only going to happen if there's an economic blockade against the Germans, as was used during the First World War. During the First World War, Britain, the U.S., and France especially kind of looked at their policies as a whole group, and resources were diverted and given, and good prices were given based on the needs of the various parties during the war. And France feels that the only way it's going to survive against this emerging, which will become an emerging Germany, and a German that's going to be a strong economic power, is for them to keep this policy that happened during World War I. Britain and France don't want to have anything to do with this, though. They're interested in free markets and also having a lot of control in the colonies, at least for the British. The French continually turn to the British during this time period, asking for some kind of a force to come into this region where the Germans are being intransigent against what's happening in the area by not fulfilling coal promises. And Britain refuses to do it because Britain, in fact, would rather have money in terms of reparations. They want to have monetary payments. The French want coal. And we'll talk about how that changes the view against the French during this time period.